Hey there, welcome back. Tonight, we're taking a quiet journey into the northern world, to a place where winter arrived early, lingered long, and shaped every breath of life. Across the fjords and frozen fields of Scandinavian villages, the Vikings learned to survive not through fury or conquest, but through patience, craft, and the quiet discipline of enduring the cold. Their winters were not gentle. Darkness ruled the sky for weeks at a time. Frost settled on roof beams like pale ash. Yet inside dim longhouses, warmth still bloomed from the simplest things. Wool threaded through careful hands, fish hung to dry in salty wind, and the low human murmur of families gathered close to a glowing hearth. By watching this video, you'll learn how these northern communities survived the long, unbroken grip of winter, how they prepared, how they protected themselves, and how they kept their spirits alive through months of quiet endurance. Before we step into that world, imagine the soft crackle of firewood drying near the door, the muffled hiss of snow drifting across a thatched roof, and the subdued amber light of tallow candles flickering against carved beams. The air smells faintly of smoke and wool grease. Outside, the land is already whitening, carrying the first hints of a season that will shape every choice a family makes. Picture yourself standing at the edge of a village in late autumn. The trees have shed their last gold leaves, leaving only dark limbs scratching the sky. The wind tastes sharp, like iron drawn from the sea. Farmers hurry to pull the final root vegetables from the soil. Fishermen coil up their nets, knowing the harbors will soon freeze. Even the animals, sheep, goats, mountain ponies, seem to gather closer, sensing what is coming. And under that pale, thinning sun, preparations begin. It is a slow ritual, repeated year after year, carried out with quiet urgency. Grain is sorted, beaten, and stored in deep wooden bins. Cod and haddock, caught in frantic autumn weeks, are laid out to become stockfish, brittle, pale, and nearly immortal in the dry air. Barrels are salted, sealed, and rolled into dark corners. Wool cloth is checked, mended, and folded into thick layers that will soon wrap around shoulders and chests. You can feel the rhythm of the village tightening, pulling inward. Every sound becomes meaningful. The rhythmic knock of an axe splitting firewood, the soft scraping of knives as women prepare roots for drying, the distant bleating of sheep being herded into winter shelters lined with straw. Even the gulls grow quieter, gliding low over the water as if sensing the sea's coming sleep. Inside the longhouses, everything takes on a deeper tone. The light dims earlier each evening, leaving people to rely on hearth glow and the faint shimmer of oil lamps. Children learn to stay close, pressed against warm bodies, wrapped in woolen cloaks. The air is thick with steam from boiling stews, scented with barley, preserved meat, and dried herbs. Shadows cling to the corners of the room, moving with every flicker of flame. As you linger in this doorway between seasons, you notice how the pace slows. The Vikings approached winter with a kind of solemn respect. They understood its danger, but they also understood its rhythm. Winter was not a surprise. It was a promise, a returning guest, harsh but familiar. And in that familiarity, there was a kind of peace. People prepared not with panic, but with memory. They remembered what had worked last year, and what had failed. They trusted the wisdom of their elders, who had endured dozens of winters before them. Outside, frost begins to appear on the grass in the early morning. Thin crystals catch the light like shattered glass. The air grows painfully crisp, turning breath into ghostly plumes that hang for a moment before dissolving. Along the shoreline, the first skins of ice cling to the rocks, forming delicate white collars that spread with each passing night. In the last days before winter fully arrives, the villagers take one final walk through their homes, checking for drafts between the turf blocks and timber beams. They reinforce the roof with fresh sod, dig channels to redirect meltwater, and bring the last bundles of birch and pine inside. Somewhere, A lone dog barks, its voice carrying far across the darkening fields, and it sounds like a reminder that the season of silence is arriving. When the final daylight fades to blue, then to charcoal, families retreat indoors. The door bars lift into place, lamps glow. The fire, carefully built at the center of the room, becomes the heart not just of the house, but of the entire winter ahead. Around that hearth, people will sleep, cook, sew, mend, tell stories, and dream. Everything will revolve around warmth, and everything they have gathered through the autumn months will now become a shield against the cold. In this moment of transition, when the first deep cold enters the land, the Vikings step into the season that defined their strength more than any raid or battle could. Their survival began not with the force of arms, but with the quiet resilience of preparation. Before we begin, a small note. If you enjoy these calm journeys through history, I upload new videos every day, so consider subscribing and turning on the bell. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? I love imagining people drifting off to the same story under different skies. Now, let's step inside the longhouse together, where the fire burns low and the winter settles over the world. Part 2. Longhouses of Ember and Shadow. The first snow has already settled across the village, softening the world beneath a pale, shimmering veil. Inside the longhouse, the fire crackles with a steady rhythm, casting warm strips of amber light across worn timber beams. The air feels dense, fragrant with smoke and wool, and every movement seems slower, as if the cold outside presses gently against the walls, urging everyone indoors to breathe more quietly. You return to this space after stepping through the fading twilight of the previous part, finding yourself in the dim heart of a Viking home as winter tightens its grip. The longhouse welcomes you not with grandeur, but with an intimate glow, a structure built to endure the darkest months through community, closeness, and the subtle patience of shared warmth. The Viking longhouse was more than shelter. It was a living organism, a spine of timber, ribs of curved beams, and a skin of turf and thatch that held in heat like a protective animal. When snowstorms howled outside, the longhouse stood firm, its thick sod walls absorbing wind and muffling the roar of winter. Inside, the world contracted into a space held together by firelight, breath, and the steady pulse of human presence. Step a little farther into this room. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth, sometimes covered with straw or rushes that soften each step. A narrow passage runs down the center, leading your eyes toward the hearth, the glowing hearthstone that anchors the entire structure. Flames lick upward, sending sparks twirling into the dim rafters. The smell of burned pine resin mixes with the faint sweetness of dried herbs hung overhead. The hearth is more than warmth, it is memory. Stories, meals, and quiet conversations all unfold in its orbit. Vikings believed the hearth carried ancestral protection, a kind of unseen tether to those who had endured winters long before. The fire was tended with devotion. Letting it die would invite not just cold, but bad luck, a spiritual hollowness that no one dared invite in the darkest months. Around the fire, long benches lined the walls, covered in furs, reindeer, bear, fox, sheep, soft and heavy, each offering a different texture of warmth. The furs smell faintly of smoke and lanolin. When touched, they feel both rugged and comforting, like a memory of the outdoors woven into indoor life. Families sleep here in shallow nests of wool blankets, bodies arranged close enough to share breath and heat. Listen closely, and you can hear the subtle soundscape of the longhouse, the gentle pop of burning wood, the whistle of the wind slipping through a narrow gap in the roof beams, the low murmur of a grandmother singing an old rhythmic verse to a drowsy child, the shift of animals, goats and sheep, resting in the small pen at the far end, their warm bodies adding to the room's living heat. This mix of human and animal presence may feel unusual to modern eyes, but for the Vikings, it was a practical and even comforting arrangement. The animals provided warmth, milk, wool, and a heartbeat that joined the pulse of the household. In the dead of winter, survival was not divided between species, it was shared. Look toward the walls. Carved wooden posts rise like silent guardians. Some are etched with patterns, spirals, knots, and symbols tied to their beliefs. Others carry deeper gouges, the marks of tools wielded by hands long gone. In the dim light, the wood glows with soft golden tones, the grain patterns forming landscapes of shadow and memory. Touching the wall, you can feel the cool, slightly rough texture beneath your fingertips, a contrast to the warm breath that fills the room. Above you, the rafters store the scent of seasons. Suspended meat hangs from hooks, drying slowly in the smoky air. Bags of grain sit tucked into corners, protected from moisture and pests. You can almost taste the dry, nutty aroma of stored barley drifting on the air. Everything is arranged with precision. Every object has a purpose. There is no space for excess in a world where winter demands efficiency. The longhouse teaches a kind of discipline, not harsh discipline, but the gentle, repeated habits that keep a community alive. Ash must be swept from the hearth to keep the smoke clear. Lamps must be trimmed so they do not sputter out. Roof beams must be checked for weakness under snow. Children learn these tasks without being told why. They simply feel the rhythm of winter working through the hands of those around them. As you walk deeper into this world of shadow and ember, the heat becomes a presence of its own. It clings to your skin, warming your cheeks while your fingers remain cool. Winter presses from outside, but in here, warmth is earned slowly, a collaboration of fire, bodies, wool, and time. You hear the soft rustle of wool skirts, the clink of a ladle against a cauldron, the exhale of two brothers settling under a fur blanket to sleep. Night deepens. The longhouse breathes. Its slow, steady pulse matches the heartbeat of every person inside. Outside, wind rattles against the turf walls like a restless spirit, but the structure stands firm, a sanctuary carved out of winter's grasp. There is something deeply human about this place, something that speaks to an ancient instinct for closeness. In the longhouse, distance collapses, strangers become family, heat is shared freely, light reaches only a few meters in any direction, but that small, glowing circle becomes an entire world. As the fire shifts, sending shadows sliding across the beams, you begin to feel the emotional weight of winter settling in, a mixture of solitude and safety, silence and companionship. The longhouse holds both. It asks nothing but presence, patience, and a willingness to move in rhythm with the season. Outside, frost thickens on the ground. The moon rises, pale and cold, illuminating the empty paths between homes. But inside, wrapped in warmth and flickering light, winter becomes something survivable, not through strength alone, but through the deep, quiet architecture of community. And so the night stretches on, slow and steady, carrying with it the promise of long months ahead. Here, in the shelter of turf and timber, the Vikings learn not just to endure winter, but to live within it, one ember at a time. Part 3. The Art of Holding Warmth. The longhouse still glows behind you, its low fire casting a soft pulse of orange through the doorway as dawn struggles to lift above the frozen horizon. The air outside feels sharper now, not cruel yet, but insistent, as though winter is beginning to test the edges of your resolve. In this season, warmth becomes something precious, something shaped by human hands as much as by flame. To survive, the Vikings learned to build warmth into their very clothing, crafting layers of wool, skin, and thread that held heat the way a story holds memory. You take a step through the dim morning light, and the cold presses against your skin like a quiet warning. It heightens every sense. You can smell the salt of the sea carried on the wind. You hear the brittle crackle of frost underfoot. The sky above feels immense and pale, its blue washed thin by the bitter air. Winter is not merely a season here. It is an atmosphere, a force, a presence that must be met with preparation rather than defiance. Viking clothing was a kind of armor against that presence, not the bright, polished armor of battle, but the soft, sturdy layering of wool and fur, a second skin that insulated both body and spirit. Begin with the simplest layer, the inner tunic, woven from soft wool, warm even when damp. Wool was the quiet hero of northern life, its fibers trapping pockets of air and turning breath into heat. A tunic like this feels dense and comforting, its surface slightly coarse against the fingers, carrying the faint, earthy scent of lanolin. Over the tunic came the outer garments, thicker and looser, designed to trap warmth without restricting movement. You can imagine a Viking pulling one on in the deep morning dark, the heavy fabric settling across their shoulders like a protective cloak. The cloth is rougher here, spun from stronger fibers, its weave tight enough to block the wind. Stitched seams run across the sleeves in long, steady lines, each one slightly raised beneath the fingertips. The process of making these garments was a winter story in itself. Women carded wool with rhythmic strokes that sounded like soft brushing over wood. The motion produced a faint cloud of fibers that clung to their hands, floating around them like a pale halo in the dim firelight. Spinning wheels hummed, their gentle turning echoing through the house. Wool thread gathered on spindles, twisting into strands strong enough to weave into a lifetime of winters. Sometimes, the oldest women worked with nalbinding, an ancient looping technique older than knitting, creating mittens and socks so dense they could withstand the coldest storms. Holding one of these garments feels like holding a piece of the longhouse made portable. Thick, warm, textured with countless small loops that catch the warmth of the body and refuse to let it escape. Step closer to the drying racks, and you'll see the colors of winter clothing: earthy browns, deep greens, muted reds. These hues come from plant dyes: madder root, woad, birch bark, the palette of the northern soil. Nothing bright, nothing loud. The colors seem softened by time, blending with the tones of the land itself. Touch one of the dyed wool strips, and you can feel the slight stiffness where it was treated, the faint smell of crushed leaves lingering in the fibers. Then comes the layer of fur and hide, the outermost defense against the bitter wind. Pelts of bear, fox, or sheep weigh heavy across a person's back, pressing a comforting warmth into their spine. The fur feels soft when stroked, but underneath is the firm, leathery hide, durable, weathered, carrying the memory of an animal that once walked the same frozen fields. In the northern world, warmth was a partnership between human and nature, each sharing life with the other in the quiet economy of survival. As you walk through the longhouse again, you see a mother dressing her child for the cold. Her hands move gently, swiftly, first the tunic, then the wool trousers, then small boots lined with soft fur. She ties a woven belt around the child's waist, the fabric thick enough to keep warmth trapped beneath it, and pulls a hood over the child's head. The little one's breath forms small clouds in the air. The mother smiles, her eyes soft in the dim glow, knowing that each layer is a kind of love made tangible. Clothing here is not fashion. It is memory, protection, inheritance. A heavy wool cloak may have been worn first by a grandfather, then repaired by a mother, then passed to a son. Its edges fray slightly, its hem darkened by years of soot and melted snow. Running your fingers along the fabric, You can feel the places where new thread meets old, small bridges of survival stitched from one generation to the next. Outside, a man prepares for a short journey to the fjord. He wraps his legs in thick woolen winnegas, crisscrossing the strips from ankle to knee, binding them with calm precision. The fabric clings firmly, adding warmth and stability on icy ground. Each wrap produces a soft, whispering sound, like snow sliding down a roof. He pulls on leather shoes lined with sheepskin, the soles sturdy and slightly stiff from days of drying near the hearth. When he steps onto the snow, the leather emits a faint creak, softened by the frost beneath it. His breath clouds around his beard, small crystals forming at its tips. Yet he feels secure, wrapped in layers that hold warmth like a secret kept close to the skin. In the quiet of this winter morning, you notice how the Vikings moved through the cold, not with fear, but with a kind of practiced calm. Their clothing was not merely protection, it was acceptance, a translation of nature's demands into human craft. The cold was not an enemy to be conquered, it was a companion whose presence required respect, preparation, and humility. Listen to the soft rustling as people shift in their wool layers, the muted thump of boots pressing into snow, the distant cry of a raven circling above the village. These sounds blend with the tactile sensations, the abrasion of wool against the wrist, the soft drag of fur along the shoulders, the slight heaviness of layered cloth, creating a sensory landscape shaped entirely by the cold. Warmth in this place is not given, it is gathered, layer by layer, thread by thread, breath by breath, and as the day darkens once more, and families retreat to the longhouse, the clothing is removed slowly, carefully, hung to dry near the fire. Steam rises faintly from damp wool, carrying the scent of the outdoors into the intimate gloom. People settle again into the glow of the hearth, letting the heat seep back into their bones. Beyond the walls, the wind sharpens, frost deepens, winter advances with quiet steps. But inside, wrapped in wool and memory, the Vikings hold warmth in their hands, not just as fabric, but as a daily, practiced art. Part 4. Ladders of Ice and Salt. The day darkens early, long before the sun reaches its brief arc across the sky. As the cold deepens, warmth becomes only one part of survival. The Vikings had another equally essential form of protection. The provisions they stored with ritual precision during the final months before winter. After all, the longhouse fire could warm the body, but only food could warm the will, the strength, the quiet endurance needed to last through months when the world slept under ice. You step outside for a moment, and the cold rushes across your skin with a clarity that takes your breath. The air smells of frozen soil, faint sea spray, and the sharp mineral scent of frost. Snow crunches beneath your feet, brittle like thin parchment. The sky is an immense gray dome, and the village is wrapped in a muted hush. No one lingers outdoors longer than necessary. Inside each home, work continues around the hearth. But there is another place where survival is shaped, and you can feel it calling like a dim heartbeat beneath the frozen ground. Follow the narrow path behind the longhouse. The snow has been cleared by careful steps, pressed into a meandering trail that leads toward the storage outbuildings. Low, heavy structures built from timber, stone, or turf. Their doors are thick, often reinforced with iron hinges. Some are half buried into slopes, their roofs covered with sod, blending into the winter landscape. These larders, cellars, and smokehouses form the quiet architecture of survival. Push open one of the doors and step inside. At first, the air feels startlingly cold, even compared to the world outside, but the cold here is controlled, an ally rather than a threat. The darkness tastes of salt and smoked wood, the scents mixing into a deep, earthy stillness. Your eyes adjust slowly, and shapes begin to take form. Hanging racks of fish, stacked barrels of cured meat, woven baskets filled with roots and hearty vegetables. This place is the beating, hidden heart of winter life. The most iconic presence is stockfish, cod, and haddock cured by the relentless northern winds rather than by heat or heavy salt. You run your fingers across a piece. It feels impossibly hard, like wood. The surface is pale, dry, and slightly rough, carrying the faint scent of the sea. When cooked, the fibers soften into something nourishing, dense with the energy needed to endure cold months. Stockfish could last for years if kept dry, a miracle crafted not by human hands alone, but by the partnership between weather and will. Near the fish racks stand barrels sealed with heavy wooden lids. Lift one slightly, and the smell of salt hits you. Mouth-watering, sharp, tinged with meat and brine. Inside lies salted pork or beef, one of the most reliable staples. The meat rests between thick layers of coarse salt, the grains resembling crystallized snow. Touch the salt, and it feels cold, gritty, slightly damp from the curing process. The barrels themselves are heavy, their iron bands tight, built to endure winter's shifting temperatures. To your right, a smaller room glows faintly from embers in a stone-lined pit. This is the smokehouse. Its air is dense and aromatic, carrying layers of wood smoke, birch, alder, sometimes juniper. Hanging from beams are slabs of fish, eels, and strips of meat. Their surfaces are darkened, glossy, and firm to the touch. When the smoke brushes your skin, you feel a prickling warmth, as though the fire has left its memory in the air. Across the floor sit baskets of root vegetables, turnips, carrots, parsnips, their skins toughened for winter. Touch a turnip, and you feel its cool, waxy firmness, the raw scent, earthy and faintly sweet. These vegetables last long into the season, becoming essential ingredients in thick, slow-boiled stews that simmer through the quiet hours of night. Next to them rests a trove of flatbread, baked during late summer and early autumn. When you lift one, it feels sturdy, crisp, almost like a wooden disc. The bread cracks with a dry whisper, releasing the faint aroma of barley and rye. It may not be soft or fresh, but it is reliable, and reliability was the foundation of winter's strength. In a small wooden box, you notice butter kept in sealed containers, thick, dense, slightly yellowed from the summer's rich pastures. Butter was a precious source of fat in winter, its texture smooth under a knife, its scent mild but nourishing. A single scoop could transform a pot of boiling barley into something that warmed not just the stomach, but the spirit. Turn around, and you see narrow shelves lined with cheese wheels left to harden through the cold months. Their surfaces are tough and slightly oily, carrying the earthy scent of cellar air. These cheeses could be shaved over stews or eaten in thin slices, each bite offering a concentrated richness born from summer grass and animal care. In tightly woven sacks lie grains, barley, rye, oats. Running your fingers through the kernels produces a soft, rhythmic sound like shifting sand. Grain was the foundation of winter meals, porridge, flatbread, thick broths. Its presence meant stability, a steady promise that no matter how long the cold lasted, there would be something to eat. You begin to understand how deeply intentional this storage system was. Nothing was accidental. Each piece of food had its place, its season, its method of preservation. The Vikings did not wait for winter to arrive. They built winter into their lives long before the first frost. They understood that survival was not achieved by strength alone, but by patience and preparation. Step back toward the door. The cold outside rushes in again, mingling with the stillness of the larder. You hear the faint creak of the wooden frame, the whisper of wind slipping through the eaves. The air feels colder, but also cleaner, as though the larder itself holds a memory of the ocean, the forest, and the fields. When you return to the longhouse, the warmth hits you softly. A pot simmers over the fire, its steam carrying notes of barley, dried herbs, and smoked meat. You feel the contrast, the icy precision of the larder and the glowing embrace of the hearth, and understand that winter survival lives between these two worlds. One preserves, the other sustains. As night settles once again, people gather around the fire to eat from deep wooden bowls. The taste is simple, hearty, filled with the quiet comfort of stored summer and autumn labor. Every bite is a reminder that the season ahead is long, but not insurmountable. In this world of ice and salt, the Vikings transformed scarcity into stability. They shaped a winter that could be endured, not by conquering the cold, but by learning to meet it with intention, craft, and memory. Part 5, Stockfish, Skyer, and the Quiet, Science of Survival. The scent of simmering stew still lingers in the air as you settle near the longhouse hearth once again. Outside, the night deepens, pressing its cold weight against the walls like a heavy blanket. The wind hums low, threading through the cracks in the roof beams, but the fire answers with a soft roar, reminding you that warmth persists even when the world turns silent. After leaving the larder, that quiet cathedral of salt, smoke, and buried cold, you begin to understand that winter survival wasn't a matter of improvisation. It was a science, refined through generations, held together by memory, observation, and a deep respect for the land's rhythms. In this season, food was not just sustenance, it was a form of wisdom, a daily conversation with the cold. Tonight, the bowl in your hands holds more than stew. It carries the story of northern nourishment, the soft interplay of fermented milk, dried fish fibers, and grains shaped into something warming. You breathe in the steam. It smells of barley and skyer, rich with subtle tang, its warmth drifting upward like a gentle fog. Each ingredient has its own path through the winter, its own logic in the long chain of survival. Let's begin with stockfish, the most iconic winter companion. Its presence was everywhere, hanging in larders, carried on voyages, traded across markets stretching into Europe. Lift a piece, and you feel its density immediately, rigid, dry, almost stone-like. When you tap it lightly against the wooden table, it gives off a faint, hollow knock, like a piece of driftwood dried in the sun. This hardness was the secret. In the cold northern air, fish didn't rot. It transformed, losing moisture slowly, its fibers tightening into an almost perpetual form. Preparing stockfish for a meal required patience. A woman might soak a piece overnight, submerging it in cold water until its texture softened, the pale surface becoming pliable enough to break apart. The transformation feels almost magical, from something resembling bone to something tender, edible, nourishing. When cooked with barley or root vegetables, the fish gives off a faint ocean-scented steam that fills the longhouse with a reminder of summer waves long gone. And then there is skyer, not the glossy, modern version widely known today, but the ancient, thick, sour creation the Vikings kept cool in wooden tubs. Its texture was dense, almost spoon-cutting. When you scoop it, it holds its shape, like soft clay touched by the warmth of your hand. Skyer tasted sharply tangy, with a clean, refreshing edge that cut through the richness of winter meals. Its scent had a faint sweetness beneath the sourness, a reminder of milk harvested from animals fed on summer's green pastures. Skyer did more than fill the stomach. It preserved protein through fermentation, transforming milk into something almost eternal. In a world without refrigeration, fermentation was a quiet form of resilience, an alchemy of time and bacteria that allowed life to persist through scarcity. Eating skyer on a frozen night felt like tasting a piece of summer trapped in a container of winter. Beside the hearth, a man breaks apart a strip of smoked lamb, the outer skin firm and darkened, the inside fragrant with the aroma of alderwood. He chews slowly, savoring the subtle sweetness of the smoke. Another family member dips a piece of flatbread into warm broth, the crisp edges softening as the liquid soaks in. The flavors are simple, salty, earthy, slightly smoky, yet deeply satisfying. They reflect the land itself, captured honestly without embellishment. Look closely at their bowls. You notice something subtle. Winter meals are never rushed. The Viking rhythm of eating was steady, unhurried, reflective of the season's own slow temperament. Even the act of chewing carries a quiet patience, as though each bite acknowledges the work that went into storing, curing, and preserving every ingredient. To your left, a woman stirs a pot of porridge over the fire. The wooden spoon moves in slow circles, scraping softly against the iron rim. The smell is gentle, barley thickened in water or milk, enriched with bits of dried fruit or a spoonful of butter. When she lifts the spoon, steam curls upward, carrying a faint sweetness mixed with the earthy aroma of grain. The porridge thickens as it cooks, becoming almost like a soft paste. When you taste it, it coats your tongue with warmth, soothing and mild. There is something deeply comforting about its simplicity, a warmth that expands slowly through your chest, easing the tension that cold air creates in your muscles. Food, in this longhouse, is not merely eaten, it is shared, passed, held. You notice the way people tilt their bowls slightly toward one another when offering a taste, a small gesture, but filled with tenderness. Winter survival was not an individual task. It was a communal practice, strengthened by small acts, repeated through countless nights. Now listen to the sounds that accompany this meal: the crackle of the fire, the faint bubbling of a pot, the clink of wooden spoons tapping softly against bowls. Each sound feels rhythmic, almost meditative. The soft murmur of voices blends into the background, low conversations about weather, repairs, or memories of warmer seasons. There is also the scent of dried herbs drifting through the air. Angelica, sometimes thyme or wild onion, picked during summer and left hanging to dry in bunches overhead. Crush one between your fingertips, and it releases a brief burst of fragrance, sharp and green, like a memory of sunlight piercing through a forest canopy. In another pot, a broth simmers with fermented whey, a byproduct of sky air. This whey, called mysa, was used in cooking to add acidity and preserve food longer. The scent rising from the pot is tangy and slightly sweet, with an undercurrent of warmth from the fire. This broth is not luxurious, but it nourishes deeply, warming the stomach and easing the weariness that long nights bring. Toward the doorway, a young man tends to fermentation vats, their wooden lids heavy and smooth. His hands smell faintly of milk, wood, and sourness, the scent of life sustaining itself through quiet chemical change. Fermentation was a science learned by observation. The Vikings may not have spoken of bacteria or biochemical processes, but they understood transformation. They trusted the slow dance of microbes in time, just as they trusted the turning of seasons. Step outside for a moment. The cold stings your cheeks, but your body still carries the warmth of the meal. Breath escapes your lips in soft clouds. The sky is a deep blue-black, pinpricked with stars. Against this vast, frozen emptiness, the longhouse glows softly, like a lantern cupped in the hands of the land itself. Inside, families finish their bowls, scraping the last bits of warmth from the wooden sides. Children curl up near their parents, sleep settling over them like an extra blanket. The last sound of the night is the quiet clatter of spoons being placed aside, followed by the long, slow settling of the fire. In this world, food is more than sustenance. It is security, memory, and the quiet science of transforming the chaos of nature into something gentle enough to carry a family through winter, through stockfish hardened by wind, through skyr aged by time, through grains saved from autumn fields. The Vikings learned not just to survive winter, but to meet it with calm, disciplined resilience. Here, in the heart of the longhouse, warmth flows not only from the hearth, but from every bowl raised to the lips, each one a promise that the cold can be endured with patience, craft, and quiet trust. Part 6. The dark months of endless night. The last traces of warmth from the evening meal fade slowly as the longhouse drifts into night. Outside, the cold deepens into something heavier, something quieter. Darkness stretches across the land like a vast, patient tide, swallowing the fjords, the forests, and the narrow paths between homes. In this part of the world, winter is not defined only by freezing air. It is shaped by darkness, thick, lingering, almost palpable, settling over the villages for weeks at a time. You step toward the doorway and lift the wooden latch just enough to gaze out. The world is ink black. No moon tonight, no starlight punching through the endless sky, only the faint whisper of falling snow, sound softened by its own descent. When you inhale, the air is cold enough to sting your lungs. It tastes of iron, pine, and distant sea spray frozen mid-breath. In such darkness, time stretches strangely. Days shrink to pale slivers of gray light, barely touching the frozen earth before fading again. People sleep longer. Voices become softer. The rhythms of life slow until every gesture feels deliberate, careful, as though each movement must be preserved for the long span of night ahead. Inside, the longhouse responds to this seasonal shift. Shadows climb the walls earlier each day. The fire becomes brighter by contrast, its glow no longer merely warmth, but guidance, a point of reference within the muted gloom. The dim amber light flickers across faces, softening sharp features into gentle silhouettes. The air inside is thick with smoke and quiet breath, creating a cocoon-like stillness. Listen closely. The sounds seem amplified in darkness. A log cracks in the fire. A child shifts under a wool blanket. A pot bubbles slowly on the hearth. A soft sigh moves through the room like a breeze, though no wind touches you. Even the smallest noises feel significant, like footsteps in a cathedral where silence is the sacred architecture. The Vikings knew these months well, this season when darkness blurs the boundary between waking and dreaming, between the world of the living and the quieter world of memory and myth. And though they approached winter with discipline and preparation, the dark months could still weigh heavily on the mind. To understand this emotional landscape, look at the faces gathered around the fire. Their expressions are calm but thoughtful, eyes reflecting the flame's delicate shimmer. Darkness outside, cold, pressing against the walls, and the uncertainty of long nights make people introspective. Elders recall winters of their youth. Parents whisper stories to soothe restless children. Young men sit sharpening tools or repairing belts, their movements slowed by the knowledge that there is little to do until daylight returns. The darkness becomes a kind of companion, not hostile, but insistent. It asks for silence, for patience. It wraps the village in a hush that encourages inward reflection. People learn to live with it, to breathe within its weight rather than resist it. The body becomes attuned to low light. The mind grows comfortable with long pauses, long shadows, long nights. Even the landscape changes shape in such darkness. Snowdrifts glow with faint bluish light when the sky allows it. Frozen rivers become sleek, black ribbons threading through the land. The mountains, once green and alive, become dark guardians standing sentinel at the edge of vision. Walk a few steps away from the longhouse, and you feel that solitude settle around you, vast and ancient. Your boots sink slightly into snow that whispers under each step. The cold presses into the space behind your collar. The faint smell of smoke from the longhouse follows you like a tether to safety. Then you hear it, the distant howl of wind threading through bare branches, rising and falling like a slow breath. It carries no malice, only the steady music of winter's long inhale and exhale. You return indoors, adding your presence to the warm collective hum of life. The The door shuts behind you with a soft thud, sealing out the vast emptiness for another night. Inside, people gather closer. The fire throws long ribbons of light across the room. A woman mends a wool sock, her needle glinting faintly. A man polishes the edge of an axe with slow, steady strokes. The metallic rasp of stone on iron feels soothing, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through the space. Darkness shifts the senses. Sight diminishes, but touch becomes more vivid. The soft drag of wool, the rough grain of wood beneath your fingertips, the warmth of a mug held between cold hands. Sound becomes sharper. Each crackle of fire, each whispered word, each soft shuffle. Smell becomes stronger. Smoke, tallow, wool grease, herbs drying above the rafters. Emotion deepens. Everything feels slower, heavier, more reflective. Children learn to read the mood of the longhouse, modulating their voices to match the quiet. They practice carving small toys or learning new stitches from their elders. Their small breaths puff into the air as they fall asleep, lashes fluttering against their cheeks. As the nights grow longer, people adapt in subtle ways. Sleep patterns shift, short naps during the day, long nights of rest, interrupted by gentle tasks. Some will rise before dawn to stoke the fire, feeling their way with practiced familiarity. Others will stay awake late into the night, telling soft stories of gods and heroes, their voices blending with the low hum of winter. The mind, too, changes. In such darkness, imagination grows vivid. People dream more. They recall distant summers with sharper clarity. They remember lost loved ones, old journeys, moments of warmth and sunlight. Darkness becomes a canvas for reflection, an endless sky upon which memories can drift, settle, and be held without distraction. Yet there is comfort, too, in this slow descent into night. The longhouse becomes a world unto itself, small but complete. The firelight pulses gently, marking the hours not with precision, but with presence. A sense of unity forms, not from grand gestures, but from quiet endurance shared by all inside the walls. And so the dark months pass, not in haste, but in measured breaths. Winter teaches patience, a patience born from listening, waiting, and trusting in the rhythm of the season. The Vikings did not rush the dark. They moved with it, letting it guide them deeper into quiet moments of companionship, introspection, and endurance. Outside, snow continues to fall in delicate flakes. Each one drifts silently, disappearing into the night without a sound. Inside, the fire glows on, and the longhouse breathes softly, a warm pulse at the center of a world wrapped in endless dark. Part 7. Winter work, tools, repairs, and slow crafts. The long darkness continues outside, patient and heavy, but inside the longhouse a quiet industry begins to stir. The deep night of winter is not a time of idleness. It is a season of slow crafts, repetitive motions, and steady hands. In these months, when the sea freezes, fields sleep, and travel becomes perilous, the Vikings turn inward to the work that sustains the coming year. You wake to the faint glow of embers, warm orange light spilling across the packed earth floor. The cold outside feels distant, held at bay by walls of turf and the muffled breath of sleeping animals. As you rise, the longhouse murmurs with soft activity, a gentle scrape of a whetstone, the low hum of voices blending with the quiet crackle of fire. This is winter work, an art of patience, precision, and rhythm. Move closer to the fire, and you see a man sharpening a sayax, the thick-bladed knife every Viking relied upon. His hands move steadily, pressing the blade against a rough stone with long, smooth strokes. Each motion creates a soft rasp, like the purring of some small creature. He is not rushing. The blade will be needed for spring hunting, for carving, for mending, for living. Winter asks for no speed, only repetition. The smell of metal dust mingles with the scent of burning birch. His fingers shine faintly with oil, catching the firelight. When he lifts the blade to inspect the edge, you see a thin, bright line reflect the glow. A whisper of sharpness. Nearby, a woman sits with a basket of wool at her feet. The fibers spill over like pale clouds, soft and tangled. She draws them through her fingers with slow, practiced movements, carding the wool until it aligns into a smooth, fluffy mass. The sound is gentle, a soft brushing, like wind passing through dried grass. She spins the wool onto a spindle, twisting it between her fingers. The spindle sways, turning slowly, its shadow dancing across the floor. With each turn, the fibers become thread, thin, strong, alive with the memory of summer grazing fields. She hums under her breath, a simple tune that rises and fades with the spinning rhythm, blending with the fire's crackle. The work is quiet, but it is everything. Farther down the hall, a young man repairs a shield rim, tapping wooden pegs into place. The sound is steady and low, the tap of wood on wood blending into the background. The shield smells of tar and ash, preserved with care to survive the dampness of spring thaw. His eyes narrow as he smooths the rim, checking for splinters. His breath leaves faint clouds in the coldest corners of the room. Another man sits cross-legged, repairing a broken bowstring. His fingers move with delicate precision, twisting sinew into place. The bow rests across his lap, its yew wood cool and polished. When he runs his hand along its curve, the wood responds with a faint creak, like an old doorway shifting in its frame. He smiles softly. The bow still lives. To your right, an older woman tends to leatherwork, sewing patches onto worn boots. She works with an iron needle warmed near the fire so it can pierce the stiff hide more easily. Each stitch is a whisper, thread pulling through leather with rhythmic resistance. The smell of tanned hide rises from her lap, earthy, warm, tinged with smoke. She pauses now and then to warm her fingers near the flames before returning to her work with renewed steadiness. In another corner, the children are practicing small crafts of their own. One carves a wooden toy animal, his knife moving in tiny, careful arcs. The shavings fall like curled petals onto the straw-covered floor. When he blows dust from the carving, the wood releases a faint, sweet scent, like sap touched by sunlight. Another child braids a cord of wool, the fibers soft against her palms. She concentrates, tongue pressed slightly between her teeth, her small fingers weaving with growing confidence. These simple crafts are lessons in patience, the first steps toward becoming full participants in winter life. Step outside for a moment. The cold wraps around you instantly, a sharp embrace that reaches through your layers. The sky is still dark, but now a faint ribbon of gray hints at approaching day. Snow blankets the village, smoothing every shape into gentle curves. Even the workshop shed near the longhouse looks softened, its roof bowed under the weight of powder. You hear the steady thock of an axe splitting wood somewhere behind you. Follow the sound. A man stands with his legs planted firmly, breath forming clouds with each exhale. His axe rises and falls in a slow, powerful rhythm. The wood splits cleanly, releasing the fragrant aroma of pine sap. Each piece is stacked neatly against the wall, fuel for long nights ahead. Winter is for mending, he murmurs without turning. His voice is deep, softened by the cold. Tools, clothes, minds. He lifts another log, its surface frosted. The wood is heavy, but he moves with ease, not from strength alone, but from the measured pace winter asks of him. You return inside, where the warmth greets you like a familiar friend. Another craft is unfolding now, a young woman repairing a net used for fishing. Her fingers weave fiber through fiber, looping knots with a rhythm that resembles breathing. Though the sea is frozen, she prepares the net for spring. The scent of salt lingers in the fibers. When she pulls the net taut to test its strength, it creaks softly, singing of waves that will return. At the far end of the longhouse, a group sits around a low table covered with tools: bone chisels, wooden mallets, needles, scrapers, awls. Each object is placed with intention. They sharpen, polish, carve, reinforce. Winter is not idle. It is essential time, a quiet forge where the coming year is shaped. Listen to the soundscape forming around you: the scraping of a blade across stone, the soft brush of wool fibers, the rhythmic tap of a hammer, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional quiet laugh that melts into the fire's glow. The air smells of wood smoke, warm wool, and the faint sweetness of pine resin melting near the fire. These scents blend together into something calming, almost hypnotic, forming a sensory cocoon that deepens the peaceful atmosphere. Winter crafts carry emotion too. They keep hands occupied so the mind does not drift too far into the weight of darkness. They give rhythm to days that would otherwise blur into long stretches of night. They transform the cold months into a season of creation, of preparing, mending, shaping, restoring. By working together, families reinforce not only tools and garments, but their own bonds. A broken axe handle repaired by one person may cut wood for another. A net woven today may catch fish for many. A cloak stitched in the dim midwinter may warm a traveler in the early spring thaw. In this way, winter becomes a bridge, a quiet, steady span between seasons, built by hands moving through tasks passed down through centuries. As night descends again, the longhouse glows warmly against the vast dark outside. People set aside their tools, stretch their tired fingers, and settle near the hearth. The fire whispers as new logs catch flame, filling the room with gentle light. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, more mending, more shaping, more slow, patient craft. But for now, the work is done. The longhouse breathes softly, and winter settles once more across the land, its silence deepened by the steady heartbeat of hands that refuse to be still. Part 8. Faith, Runes, and the Fires of Midwinter. The nights have grown so long now that dawn feels like a rumor. The sky offers only a pale gray band at the edge of the horizon before retreating again into velvet darkness. The cold has settled firmly over the village, not as a passing guest, but as a ruler, quiet and absolute. In such a season, when the fields sleep and the sea lies silent beneath sheets of ice, the Vikings turn not only to their stores of food and wool, but to something less tangible and just as necessary: faith. You wake to a stillness that feels almost holy. The longhouse is dim, lit only by the embers of a fire that has burned through the night. Thin threads of smoke rise toward the smoke hole overhead, carrying with them the faint scent of pine resin and tallow. The air feels heavy, not just with warmth, but with expectation. Today is not like other days. This is the deep middle of winter, the time when the darkness reaches its greatest depth and quietly begins to loosen its grip. In this moment, the Vikings gather around rituals that bind them to something larger than themselves, to gods, to ancestors, to unseen forces that weave through the cold air like threads of invisible light. Step outside and feel the bite of the midwinter air cling to your skin. Snow covers everything in a quiet, unbroken sheet: roofs, paths, hills. The world seems scrubbed of detail, reduced to simple shapes and muted tones. In the near distance, you see figures moving slowly toward a central clearing, their breath rising in pale plumes. Torches flicker in their hands, small golden wounds in the great dark. The snow crunches beneath your boots as you follow. The sound is muffled, absorbed by the soft blanket underfoot. Above, the sky is a deep indigo, streaked with faint river-like bands of light. The aurora, shimmering quietly, like the drifting veil of some distant spirit. It moves so slowly that you almost doubt your eyes, then realize that, yes, it is shifting, breathing, arching like a silent wave across the heavens. In the clearing, a simple wooden post rises from the snow, carved with spirals and rune-like shapes. Around it, villagers place small offerings: a piece of bread, a length of wool, a carved token, a splash of ale. These gifts are not grand. They are modest, woven from daily life, yet they carry deep meaning. In giving these things, people acknowledge that survival is never entirely within their own control. They recognize the fragile balance between effort and fate. Nearby, a man holds a small block of wood in his palm, smooth and pale, its surface marked with carved runes. Each rune is a symbol, not only of sound, but of concepts: protection, victory, harvest, luck. The cuts in the wood are sharp and precise, darkened slightly with soot so that their forms stand out clearly. When his thumb travels over them, he feels both the shallow groove and the weight of the meanings they hold. Runes in this world are more than letters. They are a way of touching the invisible, of giving shape to hope, fear, and the quiet desire for guidance through a season that tests the body and the spirit. Some are carved into wooden amulets and worn on cords around the neck. Others are etched into beams, tools, or the edges of a family's treasured possessions. They stand as whispered prayers encoded in lines and angles. As the villagers gather, a small fire is built at the center of the clearing. The wood is carefully chosen, dry, resinous, crackling with hidden light. When the spark catches, the flame rises slowly, thinning the darkness with its glow. The fire's warmth reaches your face, a gentle contrast to the icy air. The smell of smoke mixes with the faint scent of pine and leather, creating a familiar, comforting atmosphere. Someone adds a larger log, a Yule log, cut and saved especially for this time of year. It is thick, heavy, its bark dark and ridged. As it catches flame, sparks leap upward, whirling briefly before disappearing into the night. The log will burn for many hours, sometimes for days, its endurance symbolizing the steady return of light even in the deepest dark. Watching it, you feel a quiet reassurance settle over the group. Voices rise, not in a shout, but in a low, collective hum. Some murmur short prayers to Odin, asking for wisdom and watchfulness during the long nights. Others think of Freya, god of fertility and renewed growth, and silently hope for a gentle spring. Some whisper to the memory of their ancestors, trusting that those who survived winters past may somehow lend strength to those living through this one. There is no need for long speeches. The ritual lives in gestures, in the way a hand hovers over the fire before tracing a small sign in the air, in the way eyes close briefly as offerings are laid down. The cold stings their cheeks, nips at their fingertips, but the fire's glow and the company of others soften its edge. Around the flames, faces look both older and softer in the light. Shadows carve lines deeper, but the eyes shine with a gentle resilience. This is not a triumphant ceremony. It is a humble one, grounded in reality. The villagers know that winter will not vanish overnight, but they also know that even the longest night bends eventually toward dawn. This ritual is their way of acknowledging that turning, aligning themselves with it in quiet faith. Back in the longhouse, smaller acts of devotion unfold. A woman traces a tiny rune onto the handle of a spoon before stirring a pot, as if to invite good fortune into the family's meals. A man lifts a drinking horn and pours a few drops of ale onto the floor near the hearth, an offering to the spirits of the house, to the invisible guardians who watch over the fire. The liquid hisses faintly as it hits a hot stone, releasing a brief, sweet scent of malt and smoke. Children watch these gestures with wide eyes. They lean into their parents, asking soft questions. Who are these gods? Why do we light the log? Why do we carve the strange shapes into wood? The answers come not as rigid lessons, but as stories told in calm voices, tales of Odin wandering in disguise, of Thor's hammer protecting the world from frost giants, of unseen beings who travel through the winter night. These stories do not chase away the darkness, but they soften it. They give it a language, a shape, a set of familiar patterns. When a storm howls outside and the wind rattles the roof, it becomes easier to imagine it as some restless spirit wandering past, rather than an aimless force of chaos. Faith offers a framework for the mind, a way to hold fear gently without letting it grow too large. Listen to the way the longhouse sounds on this midwinter night. The fire crackles more intensely, fed with better wood than usual for the occasion. Laughter slips more readily between the low conversations. The clink of cups is a little more frequent, as if each person is toasting not only the gods, but the fragile, persistent act of simply making it this far into winter. The smell of roasted meat hangs in the air, richer than on an ordinary day. Herbs have been added more generously. Butter melts slowly into thick slices of bread. The senses are rewarded. Taste, smell, touch, sight, all are gently filled, as though the community is reminding itself that life still has texture and flavor, even when the land lies frozen. In a quiet corner, an elder holds a small piece of bone carved with runes. His hands are wrinkled, the skin thin and marked with years of cold and work. He does not read the runes aloud. He simply holds them, thumb moving back and forth across the familiar grooves. For him, they are both memory and map, a way of orienting himself in a world that shifts with each season. Eventually, the night deepens again. The Yule fire outside continues to burn, a steadfast point of light in the surrounding dark. Inside, people begin to drift towards sleep, some curling near the hearth, others settling on benches covered with furs. The smell of smoke clings to their hair and clothes. The air hums with the faint residue of songs, prayers, and the crackle of burning wood. Faith, in this world, is not loud. It is quiet, woven into daily acts and winter rituals. It moves through carved lines on wood, in the small flick of a wrist pouring a libation, in the way eyes lift briefly toward the sky before stepping out into the cold. It offers no promise of ease, only the comforting thought that they are not alone, that their struggle is seen, their endurance honored, their lives part of a larger pattern. As sleep settles over the longhouse, the fire continues its patient glow. Outside, the great dark of midwinter holds the land in its careful hands, and somewhere beyond, the first almost imperceptible turning toward longer days has already begun. Part 9, Snowbound Journeys and Frozen Seas. The Yule fires have burned low, leaving faint rings of ash beneath the snow. The sky above the village has shifted again into a deep, silent gray, a color that seems to swallow light rather than reflect it. Winter now grips the land with full strength. Everything beyond the warmth of the longhouse seems distant, simplified, reduced to shapes softened by snowfall and shadows. Yet even in the heart of winter, some journeys cannot be postponed. Wood must be gathered, animals checked, traps inspected, neighbors visited, and sometimes messages delivered across frozen fjords. And so the Vikings, despite their reverence for the firelit safety of home, step out into the vast quiet of winter's frozen world. You begin this part standing near the longhouse entrance as a man prepares for a short trek. His breath blooms in white clouds. A fur-lined hood covers his head, the wool beneath it thick and layered. His boots, stiff with frost, crunch against the snow as he tests their fit. Before he leaves, he presses a hand against the doorframe, a gesture less ritual than reassurance, as if to remind himself of the warmth waiting for his return. Outside, the world feels enormous. The snow absorbs sound, creating a strange, dreamlike atmosphere where even your own footsteps seem muted. Each inhale is sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine, sea salt, and distant ice. The air feels heavy and clean, so pure it almost stings. When the wind rises, it brushes frost along your cheeks like grains of sand. The man moves ahead, following a narrow trail carved by repeated use. His footsteps leave crisp indentations, each one filling slightly at the edges as a fine dusting of snow drifts across them. The sky above is pale and expansive. There is no sun, only a diffused glow that softens the entire landscape into gentle shades of white and blue. Walking in winter requires a different rhythm. Steps are slower, more deliberate. The path is uneven beneath the snow, and hidden ice waits under certain patches. A single misjudgment, a single fall, could mean injury far from warmth. So the Vikings walk with care, leaning slightly into the wind, listening for changes in the snow's texture underfoot. Soft snow, crusted snow, snow that hides danger beneath its untouched surface. In the forest, tall pines creak softly under the weight of accumulated frost. Their branches droop, fringed with icicles that catch what little light filters through the sky. When one icicle falls, it strikes the snow with a delicate chime that rings for only a moment before fading again into silence. Farther on, tracks crisscross the ground. Deer, rabbit, fox. Each print is a small story written in snow. The Vikings read them with ease, understanding the habits of animals even in this dormant season. A fox's trail veers toward a cluster of trees. Rabbit tracks disappear abruptly into a hollow. These signs are not just curiosities. They are clues, maps, a way of navigating a world that grows unfamiliar under winter's thick blanket. When the man reaches a small clearing, he pauses, listening. The forest hums with a quiet so complete it feels like an entity in itself. Then, faintly, you hear a distant cracking sound, the sound of freezing wood expanding, echoing through the trees like the slow heartbeat of the land. Now follow the path downhill toward the frozen fjord. The sea, once shifting and alive, lies stiff and silent. A layer of ice stretches across the water, smooth in places, rippled in others where wind shaped the surface before it fully hardened. Snow rests atop it, blurring the boundary between land and sea. When you step closer, the cold intensifies. The air tastes sharper here, tinged with salt and something metallic. The man tests the ice with a long wooden pole. The sound is soft, but telling. A deep, solid thump where the ice is strong, a muted, unsettling crackle where it thins. Experience guides him. He skirts the weaker patches, following routes known from years of crossing. Beneath the ice lies the dark, restless body of water, a reminder that even in deep winter, the sea is never fully still. As you step onto the solid section of ice, it feels like entering another world. The surface is firm, but cold enough to burn through layers of leather if you linger too long. Small cracks spiderweb beneath your feet, catching the faint ambient light. When you stand still, you can sometimes hear the ice groan, a long, low, wail-like moan that vibrates faintly through your boots. It is not dangerous, only alive, shifting with temperature changes and the weight above it. Crossing a frozen fjord is both eerie and beautiful. The vast openness expands around you, the land receding to distant silhouettes. Snow dances across the ice in small spirals when the wind catches it, creating tiny ghost-like eddies that glide past your legs. Your breath feels louder here, your heartbeat clearer. Imagine the journey to a neighboring farm on such a day. A solitary figure moves steadily across the fjord, wool cloak whipping in the wind. His staff taps the ice rhythmically, producing a soft, steady beat. Behind him, the longhouse he came from is a faint, glowing memory. Ahead, Another small cluster of buildings sits at the edge of the land, smoke rising sluggishly from a hearth. Travel in winter is never solitary in spirit. With each step, the Vikings carry their ancestors' knowledge, where the ice holds, where storms gather, where the wind funnels hardest through narrow valleys. This inherited wisdom is as essential as clothing or tools. Sometimes a journey is not practical, but necessary for survival. Traps must be checked, especially snares set for rabbits or pits for larger game. The meat from a single animal can lengthen a family's endurance. When the man reaches one such trap, a small rabbit lies motionless, preserved perfectly by the cold. He kneels, the snow crunching beneath his weight, and lifts the creature gently. His breath hovers around him like smoke as he murmurs a quiet thanks. Not a prayer exactly, but a gesture acknowledging the fragile exchange between life and winter. On the return journey, the wind grows stronger. It howls through the trees as though trying to sweep the land clean. Snow lifts from the ground in swirling veils that blur the path. Visibility narrows. The world becomes a shifting mosaic of white. In such moments, memory and landmarks guide the Vikings more than sight. A bent tree trunk, a boulder with a familiar ridge, the faint smell of wood smoke drifting from the village. Finally, the dark outline of the longhouse emerges through the storm. Smoke rises from the roof vent. The door opens, spilling warm amber light onto the snow. The man steps inside, stamping frost from his boots. The air embraces him immediately, warm, thick with scent, alive with murmurs. Inside, a woman takes the rabbit and begins preparing it with calm efficiency. The smell of boiling broth soon mixes with the earthy, iron-tinged scent of fresh meat. The man sits by the fire, rubbing warmth back into his hands. He doesn't speak right away. Winter journeys are not recounted loudly. They are folded quietly into the rhythm of the evening. The longhouse walls hold the story of the day without the need for many words. The cold conquered, the fjord crossed, the food retrieved. All of it becomes part of the ongoing dance between people and their landscape. Outside, the storm continues to whisper across the frozen sea, but inside, warmth settles again. The fire glows steadily. A pot simmers. Children laugh softly. The longhouse feels like the anchor of a drifting world. And the Vikings, shaped by winter more than any other force, understand deeply that every journey, even the smallest step into snow or across ice, is a conversation with the season, a negotiation, a reminder of fragility and resilience intertwined beneath the great frozen sky. Part 10. Children, Elders, and the Tender Edges of Survival. By now, the winter feels endless, a season so long and deep that it almost seems to erase the memory of green fields and open water. The longhouse has become a complete world, its walls holding the warmth, smells, and voices of everyone inside. Yet, within this sheltered space, not all bodies face the cold equally. Winter presses hardest at the edges of life, on children at the beginning of their journeys, and on elders who carry many winters already in their bones. You sit close to the hearth and watch the way the light falls across the faces around you. A child's cheeks glow pink from the heat, eyes heavy with drowsiness but still bright with curiosity. Nearby, an old woman's hands rest in her lap, veins raised beneath thin skin, her posture slightly stooped, yet dignified. The same fire warms them both, but it does not touch them equally. Their bodies require more care, more watchfulness, more quiet protection. Listen to the sounds of the morning as the longhouse wakes. A baby murmurs softly, a few uncertain noises that quickly rise into a tiny cry. The sound is thin, almost fragile, yet it carries a surprising weight through the room. A mother rises at once, wrapping the child in a woolen blanket still warm from her own sleep. She presses the baby close to her chest, her body acting as an extra layer of insulation against the cold air. You can feel the small shape of the child through the fabric, warm, trembling slightly, heart beating in rapid, fluttering bursts. The baby's breath is soft against the mother's neck, carrying a faint, milky scent. She rocks gently, humming under her breath, the melody simple and slow. The firelight catches in her hair, turning it briefly into threads of gold before shadows reclaim it. Children in this world learn the language of winter early. They know how to stay close to warmth, where the safest place in the longhouse is, how to tuck their hands inside their sleeves when the air bites at their skin. Their games adapt to the season, drawing shapes in the ash near the hearth, carving small figures from scraps of wood, braiding bits of leftover wool into cords. Watch a young boy as he kneels near the fire, carefully arranging carved wooden animals in a circle. His fingers are nimble, nails edged with soot. He gives each small figure a place, the carved horse, the cow, the goat, the dog, as though building a tiny version of the outside world that the snow currently hides. His breath escapes in faint white wisps as he plays, even inside, where the air is still cool away from the flames. The elders, meanwhile, move more slowly through the longhouse. Their joints stiffen in the cold, their steps shorter, their breaths sometimes shallow after climbing a small rise or carrying a load of wood. An old man sits wrapped in a thick fur cloak, his feet resting on a small wooden block to keep them from the cold ground. His beard is silver, his eyes pale but sharp. He watches everything, the children's games, the women's spinning, the men's repairs, with a quiet, measuring gaze. In winter, the village leans in closer around its elders. They are not only vulnerable bodies, they are the holders of experience. The stories they tell at night are not simply entertainments, but practical memory. Descriptions of winters with deeper snow, harsher winds, thinner stores. When they say, "It was like this once before," their words become a map of what might still lie ahead. You notice how often someone checks on the old woman near the hearth. A granddaughter places an extra fur around her shoulders without being asked. A grandson refills her cup with warm broth, making sure her hands close firmly around it. Each gesture is small, almost invisible, yet together they form a quiet net of care woven around her. The elders repay this care in their own way. When a child is restless, it is often an elder who calls them close, drawing them into the circle of lamplight to teach them a simple craft: how to twist cord, how to whittle safely, how to read the grain of wood. The old woman's hands may tremble slightly as she demonstrates, but her voice is steady. The child's eyes follow every movement, learning not just the skill, but the calm that accompanies it. Outside, the wind rises suddenly, rattling the turf walls with a low, hollow sound. Children glance toward the door, eyes wide. The storm's voice is powerful, a reminder of the danger just beyond the longhouse walls. The old man clears his throat and begins a story, his voice slow and deep. He speaks of a winter long ago, harsher than this one, of nights when the fire nearly failed, of journeys made across the ice with little hope of return. As he speaks, his words move like a second fire through the room, warming not the body, but the mind. He does not embellish, does not hide the difficulty of those days, but he always ends with survival. The day the storm broke, the moment the first thaw began, the sight of birds returning to the sky. The children listen, leaning against their parents, eyes reflecting both fear and reassurance. The elders' stories tell them something vital, that hardship is not new, and that others have walked through it before. Even simple daily tasks take on extra meaning when children and elders are present. A mother checks the baby's skin for any sign of chill. She touches tiny fingertips, small toes, feeling for warmth. If the child's nose grows too cold, she wraps an extra layer around the small head, tucking it snugly beneath her own cloak. An elder's hands may ache, but they still stir the pot, taste the broth, add herbs from memory rather than sight. They've learned over decades exactly how food should smell at each stage of cooking. Their senses, though dulled in some ways, sharpen in others, compensating for what time has taken. In such a world, survival is a shared responsibility. The strong do not simply protect the weak, they are guided by them. Elders shape decisions with cautious wisdom. Children remind adults why the effort matters, why wood is chopped, why food is stored carefully, why fires are never allowed to burn out. Their laughter, even when subdued by cold, is a bright thread woven through the heavy fabric of winter. Step outside again for a moment and imagine a different scene, a child and an elder walking together from one longhouse to another. The child moves quickly, boots kicking up small puffs of snow. The elder moves slowly, planting their staff carefully with each step. The sky is a soft gray, snow falling in tiny flakes that land on their cloaks and hair. Their breaths rise together in soft plumes. The child chats quietly, pointing out tracks in the snow, shapes in the clouds, the way ice has formed along the edges of a roof. The elder listens, smiling faintly, offering sparse but thoughtful comments. It's a small journey, a few hundred steps at most, but in winter, every step is meaningful. Each one is taken with intention, shared between the eagerness of youth and the caution of age. When they return to the longhouse, cheeks flushed, the warmth inside envelops them immediately. The old one sinks carefully onto a bench, exhaling with relief as the heat seeps into tired joints. The child, energized by the cold air, hovers near the fire, holding out small hands to the flames, watching the skin glow faintly orange in the light. Night falls again, though in truth it never fully left. The longhouse settles into sleep. Children curl like small animals beneath layers of fur, faces softened by dreams. Elders lie covered in blankets that hold the faint scent of smoke and wool, their breaths slow and measured. Some cough occasionally, a dry sound that echoes briefly before fading back into the rhythm of the fire. In the quiet, you sense how delicate this balance is. Winter has always tested these edges, the very young and the very old. But the Vikings' answer is not despair. It is care, layered, constant, practical care. Shared food, shared warmth, shared stories. The tender edges of survival are where a community's true nature reveals itself. In this longhouse, under this roof of turf and timber, winter has not erased compassion. It has deepened it, sharpening the awareness that every life within these walls is bound to every other, and that survival is not only a matter of strength, but of how gently a people hold those who stand closest to the darkness. Part 11, Tales Told Against the Cold. Another night settles over the longhouse, thick and heavy as felt. Outside, the wind wanders across the frozen land with a wandering, low moan, brushing against the turf walls like a creature seeking entry. The darkness is deep, so deep it seems to swallow sound itself. Yet inside, the hearth glows steadily, a warm amber nucleus around which every life in the room revolves. As the evening meal fades into memory and the chores of the day slip quietly into stillness, a different kind of work begins, a work of stories. Winter was the season when the Vikings' world grew small, but their imaginations expanded to fill the vast spaces left by the absent sun. You settle near the hearth, feeling the heat soften your cheeks as you lean back against a wooden post. The fire crackles gently, sending up thin spirals of smoke that curl through the air before vanishing into the shadowed rafters. Around you, bodies shift, blankets rustle, and slow, contented breaths mix with the soft hum of anticipation. Tonight, as on countless winter nights before, stories will be told. An elder, the same one whose voice steadied the children in earlier storms, leans forward, resting his hands on his knees. The firelight catches the deep lines on his face, illuminating them like faint rivers carved through age. His eyes glimmer with something that feels older than memory, a quiet knowledge carried through decades of listening and surviving. He begins not with a flourish, but with a steady tone, low and smoky. There was a time, he says, when the world was not as we know it now, when the land itself was forming, and the sky trembled with power. The room grows still. Even the fire seems to quiet, as if listening. His voice weaves a tale of Odin wandering through storm and snow, of Thor's hammer striking frost giants in distant, icy realms, of brave ancestors who faced winter with courage and cunning. The names are familiar to everyone in the longhouse, gods and heroes whose stories are passed down like heirlooms of the spirit. As he speaks, the atmosphere shifts. The dark corners of the room seem to pulse with life, as though the stories reach into them and light them from within. Shadows dance across the walls, flickering in rhythm with his words. The smell of smoke deepens, enriched by the scent of burning pine resin. The warmth of the fire seems to grow, embracing every listener. Children listen with eyes wide as polished stones. They inch closer to the storyteller, furs trailing behind them, cheeks flushed from the fire. One child rests her head on her mother's lap, fingers gripping a small carved wooden bear. Another clutches a woolen blanket, as though holding on to the very edge of the story. For a moment, the world outside, the ice, the cold, the wind, disappears. Only the tale remains, lifting the room into a space where imagination becomes shelter. Stories in winter serve many purposes. Some entertain, others warn. Many preserve memory. Tonight's story shifts, no longer about gods, but about a fisherman the elder knew in his youth. The man once crossed a fjord during a brutal storm, guided only by the faint glow of his home's hearth through layers of snow. The elder's hands move as he speaks, mimicking the motion of the fisherman's struggle, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. He found his way, the elder says softly, because he remembered the sound of his mother's voice, telling him that home burns brightest when the night is darkest. The words settle into the silence like falling snow. Nearby, a young man adds another tale, a shorter one, but full of humor. It describes a neighbor who tried to chase away a fox, only to slip on ice and land headfirst in a drift. Laughter spreads, warm and quiet, moving like a ripple across a pond. The sound feels soothing, easing the weight of dark hours. Stories move from person to person, like embers passed from one hand to another. A woman recounts a dream she had the previous night, a strange mix of ancestors and winter wolves. A teenager describes a moment last autumn when he found a carved stone buried near the riverbank. An older woman offers a tale of her grandmother, who once rescued a newborn goat in a blizzard, warming it against her own chest as she ran home through swirling snow. Each story adds something to the room: warmth, memory, connection. Outside, snow begins to fall again. You can hear its faint hiss against the roof, a whisper barely distinguishable from silence. The longhouse feels even more insulated now, wrapped not only in turf and timber, but in the layers of each story spoken aloud. The elder lifts another wooden rune token, carved earlier in the season. He traces it with his thumb as he speaks about the rune's meaning. Algiz, the symbol of protection. His voice is soft, almost reverent. He explains that runes are not magical in the loud, dramatic sense, but in the quiet way they help people remember what matters. Courage, shelter, the unseen guardianship of ancestors. Someone brings out a small harp, a simple wooden lyre strung with gut strings. Its sound is delicate, almost fragile, in the fire-warmed air. The musician plucks a tune, slow and wandering, letting each note drift into the rafters. The melody feels like a low wind crossing a distant hill, or the slow drip of thawing ice. It holds the room in a gentle stillness. The music blends with the crackle of fire, the breathing of children, the shifting of wool blankets. Stories follow the music, filling the space it leaves behind. A process as natural as inhaling and exhaling. Then the storytelling softens. Voices lower. The fire hums steadily, casting gentle shadows. The air grows warmer, thicker, almost hazy with comfort. A child asks for one more story, the one about the woman who followed a brilliant star through a snowstorm to find her lost sheep. The elder nods, beginning with a slow, rhythmic cadence. His voice seems to float, each word melting softly into the next, turning the longhouse into a quiet cradle of sound. By the end of the tale, the child's eyelids droop. She curls into her mother's arms, breath steady and slow. The storytelling ends not with a final declaration, but with a gentle fading, a natural settling of voices into silence. The fire continues to glow. A pot of broth simmers softly. The longhouse breathes as one. Across the room, the elder closes his eyes, the rune still in his palm. The musician sets the lyre aside, its final note vibrating faintly in the air. Someone adds a log to the fire, and sparks spiral upward like tiny stars returning to the sky. In the quiet that follows, you understand something deeply. Stories are not a distraction from winter. They are a way of surviving it. They offer warmth that fire alone cannot give. Warmth of memory, imagination, and shared humanity. In the long night of the north, a tale told in a soft voice is its own kind of hearth. Outside, the snow continues to fall. Inside, sleep begins to settle, slow and gentle as the last embers pulse in the heart of the longhouse. Part 12. Wolves at the edge of the light. The fire in the longhouse still burns with a steady, patient glow, and the echoes of stories told the night before linger in the air like faint smoke. But as days and nights blend into one long, muted span of winter, the Vikings remain quietly aware that survival is never guaranteed. Beyond the warmth of the hearth, the world still holds teeth, not just in the form of animals, but in hunger, sickness, and storms that arrive without warning. You wake to a morning that looks almost indistinguishable from night. A pale gray light filters through the smoke hole, barely enough to outline shapes inside the room. The air feels cooler than usual. The fire burned low during the long hours of sleep. Someone rises, shoulders wrapped tightly in wool, and adds a log to the embers, coaxing flame back into strength with practiced patience. As the fire slowly brightens, you notice the quiet tension in the room. It isn't panic, just a subtle sharpening of awareness. A child coughs, a thin, dry sound that seems louder than it is. An elder watches closely, eyes measuring. Winter has always tested the body, and now, deep in its core, those tests become more frequent. You can sense that the season has reached a critical point. Food stores, once full and reassuring, have lowered. In the larder, gaps appear between barrels. Baskets of roots are not empty, but they are no longer overflowing. When someone lifts a lid from a grain chest, the sound of kernels spilling against wood is thinner, quieter. The cold is still strong. The days are still short. The knowledge that there is enough, but not too much, sharpens every decision. Outside, the snowdrifts have grown tall and wind-carved, their surfaces rippled like frozen waves. The sky hangs low, heavy with unseen clouds. You step out for a moment, and the cold slides into your lungs like clear glass. Everything feels still, but the stillness has a certain edge to it, the sense that the land is waiting. Then you hear it, a distant howl. It rises from beyond the tree line, not close, but not far enough to ignore. The sound is long and low, carrying easily across the frozen fields. It's answered by a second voice, higher, more questioning, echoing through the dim air. The wolves have come closer to the village, drawn by the smell of animals. by the promise of life clustered against the cold. For the Vikings, wolves were both familiar and unsettling. They were not monsters, but competitors, survivors of the same harsh world. Their presence reminded people that winter was not simply a challenge of temperature. It was a negotiation of territory and hunger, for humans and animals alike. You watch as a man walks carefully along the boundary of the settlement, his boots sinking into the snow with each step. He checks the simple wooden fences, the stakes driven into the frozen ground to keep animals close and predators at a distance. His breath forms soft clouds that drift over his shoulder. A spear rests lightly in his hand, not raised, just present. The scent of animal pens hangs in the air, warm, pungent, earthy. Sheep pressed together under sheltering roofs, their wool thick and matted. Cows exhale steam into the cold, their eyes dark and slow. These animals are more than property. They are warmth in living form, food and milk and future security. Protecting them is as vital as tending the hearth. The wolves do not attack recklessly. They linger at the edge of the light, shadows slipping between trees. You rarely see them clearly, perhaps a fleeting movement against the snow, a faint impression of tracks circling just beyond the village's reach. Their paws leave distinct marks, pads broad, claws sharp, each step deliberate. When the wind shifts, you catch the faint scent of wild fur and cold breath, a tang of something untamed. In the longhouse, people speak of them in quiet tones, not with terror, but with respect. Children are reminded not to wander beyond the cleared paths. Dogs are kept closer at night. A spear and bow rest near the doorway, not as weapons of aggression, but as tools of last resort. Yet wolves are only one edge of danger. Another lies closer, gentler in appearance, illness. As the season stretches on, the air inside the longhouse grows dense, with breath, smoke, and the faint dampness of drying clothes. Bodies stay close together, sharing warmth, but also sharing whatever invisible ailments drift between them. A cough spreads from one person to another like a slow echo. A fever flares in a child, heat gathering beneath the skin like a trapped ember. When someone falls ill, the rhythm of the room changes. Voices soften, tasks rearrange themselves around the sick bed. A mother dips a cloth into cool water, wringing it out before placing it gently against a hot forehead. The cloth smells faintly of herbs, perhaps yarrow or angelica, gathered in warmer months and now used in small, careful doses. The patient's breath comes in shallow waves, each exhale sounding slightly rough, like wind passing through brittle reeds. There are no physicians in the modern sense, but there is knowledge, carried in the memories of those who have watched many winters take their toll. Elders recall which teas ease the chest, which poultices soothe the skin, which prayers bring comfort when cures are uncertain. They cannot banish illness entirely, but they can surround it with care. Meanwhile, storms threaten from the sky. One evening, as people prepare to sleep, the wind begins to rise with an unfamiliar intensity. It whistles against the roof, searching for weaknesses. Snow strikes the walls in rapid pulses, like thousands of small fists. The noise grows, building into a roar that fills the longhouse with a low, constant vibration. The fire smoke wavers, pulled sideways by drafts. Inside, the atmosphere tightens. Men check the door bar, ensuring it is firmly in place. Women gather children closer, tucking them deeper beneath furs. The air smells more strongly of smoke and human warmth, as though the storm outside has pressed everything inward. Through tiny gaps in the structure, cold air snakes in, curling along the floor. Someone stuffs wool into the cracks, their fingers reddened and stiff. The fire is fed more generously than usual, sparks leaping up in protest before settling into a stronger, more determined flame. All night, the storm continues its assault. The roof creaks under the weight of driven snow. The walls tremble occasionally, making the carved beams groan softly. But the longhouse holds. It was built for this, not as a delicate shelter, but as a sturdy, grounded creature that knows how to withstand the temper of the sky. Sleep comes fitfully. You doze in fragments, waking at intervals to the storm's voice, to a child's soft whimper, to the crackle of shifting logs. Somewhere in the dark, someone whispers a quiet prayer, not for the storm to stop, but for the strength to endure until it does. By morning, the world has changed again. When the door is finally pushed open, it meets resistance, a wall of snow piled high through the night. Light spills in, bluish and muted. The air outside is strangely calm, as if the storm has used up all its restlessness and now lies spent. Slowly, the doorway is cleared. Snow is shoveled away with wooden tools, each movement sending fine crystals into the air. The village emerges into a landscape reshaped, drifts towering higher than a man, roofs nearly buried, paths erased as though they never existed. But the longhouse still stands. The animals are still alive. The fire is still burning. This is how winter's dangers are faced, not with loud heroics, but with steady, repeated acts of resistance and care. Wolves kept at the edge of light, illness surrounded by gentle hands and herbal remembering, storms met with strong beams, thick walls, and watchful eyes. The Vikings knew that survival meant living with danger, not denying it. They acknowledged the sharpness of winter's teeth while continuing to mend, cook, laugh, and tell stories. The threats outside the door, and sometimes inside the body, became part of the season's texture, woven into the fabric of their daily lives. Part 13. The First Thaw. Hope rising through the crust of ice. Winter never ends all at once. It loosens its grip slowly, almost reluctantly, as though deciding whether to release the land from its long frozen hold. In the far north, the first signs are subtle, so subtle that only those who have lived many winters can truly recognize them. Yet on a certain morning, as the longhouse begins to stir, you feel it, the smallest shift in the air, like a breath drawn more deeply than usual. The fire still burns low, casting its familiar amber glow across fur-draped benches and quiet sleepers. But the cold that usually presses so sharply against the walls feels slightly softened, its edges blunted. Someone opens the longhouse door, expecting the usual rush of icy wind. Yet what enters instead is something gentler, a breeze carrying the faintest hint of moisture. You step outside. The world remains covered in snow, but its surface appears different now, shimmering with a thin sheen that catches the early light. The sky has taken on a faint blush of pink along the horizon, a color not seen for many long weeks. You inhale deeply. The air tastes of frost still, but also of something else. The quiet, sweet scent of melting. The first thaw has begun. At first glance, nothing dramatic has changed. Snow still lies in thick, unbroken fields. Frost still coats branches, glinting like crystal in the pale light. Yet every detail hums with a subtle shift. When you press your boot into the snow, it sinks a little deeper, the crust no longer hard as stone. When you listen, you hear faint trickling. Not loud, just small threads of water weaving their way beneath the surface. These sounds feel almost miraculous in the quiet world of winter. The land has begun to breathe again. Back inside, people notice the change with a mixture of hope and caution. Some smile quietly as they warm their hands by the fire. Others exchange knowing glances, not too joyful yet, for winter still has teeth, and storms can return without warning. But beneath the careful restraint, something gentle begins to grow, relief. You watch as a young woman steps outside to gather snow for melting. She pauses, her brow lifting slightly as she feels the altered texture beneath her fingers. The snow is wetter than yesterday, heavier. She smiles, a small private smile, and returns with her bucket. Soon, pots simmer more vigorously, filled with melting snow that releases a faint mineral scent as it turns to water. Steam rises in thicker swirls, carrying warmth through the longhouse. Children notice the way the steam fogs the air and make small drawings with their fingers on wooden bowls warmed by the fire. The animals sense it too. Sheep bleat more often, sniffing the air as if testing the world. A cow shifts its weight, stomping the ground with less reluctance. Even the dogs seem livelier, tails swaying a little higher, ears lifting as they catch new smells drifting through the crisp air. Later in the morning, the men prepare to inspect the landscape. They move cautiously through the snow, spears and walking staffs in hand. The sky overhead continues to lighten, no longer crushed by winter's oppressive gray. Light filters down, soft but persistent, revealing the faint outlines of distant hills. As you follow them, the snow crunching beneath your boots sounds different, wetter, less brittle. You hear occasional cracks as the ice beneath the surface shifts or collapses underfoot, revealing dark patches of earth. These glimpses of soil feel startling after months of uninterrupted white, like memories resurfacing slowly from deep sleep. At the edge of the forest, you see droplets forming at the tips of pine needles. They gather, quiver, and fall, tiny beads of water that glint for a moment before disappearing into the snow. Each one feels like a promise. The forest itself smells different. Alongside the familiar cold sap fragrance, you detect the faint scent of damp bark, a smell that only returns when the trees begin to wake. The birds have not returned yet, but the occasional distant crack of thawing wood breaks the silence, echoing like a slow, deep exhale from the forest's hidden heart. When the group reaches the frozen river, the change is even more pronounced. The ice is still thick, still untrustworthy in places, but along the edges where sunlight falls directly, narrow strips of dark, open water appear. They ripple quietly, like small, shy movements beneath a blanket. The sound of flowing water, after so many still months, feels almost like music. One of the men kneels near the edge, resting his hand briefly on the cold surface. He closes his eyes, listening to the faint trickle beneath his palm. When he rises, his expression is solemn, yet softened by something almost tender. "It begins," he murmurs. Back in the village, people respond to the thaw with renewed rhythms. Women take cloaks outside to shake away months of accumulated frost. The firs smell of smoke and wool and cold air, their fibers stiff but loyal. When shaken, small clouds of frost drift off like shimmering dust. Children laugh softly as they poke sticks into melting snowbanks, watching wet clumps break off and fall. Their cheeks are flushed with something more than fire warmth, a subtle excitement that even the adults can quite suppress. Inside the longhouse, the shifting season changes the feel of the fire. Flames burn brighter as the air becomes slightly more humid. The logs hiss softly as moisture touches them. The smell becomes more complex. Wood smoke mingling with the earthy scent of melting snow dripping from boots and cloaks. Elders notice the change with a slow, thoughtful calm. They've seen winter's end and winter's return again. They speak quietly about past thaws that came early or late or too suddenly. Their voices hold both caution and comfort. Winter gives back what it takes, one says, looking toward the melting icicles outside, but only in its own time. Days lengthen almost imperceptibly. Instead of a dim sliver of light, there is now a faint daytime glow that lingers for a little longer. Shadows appear again on the walls of the longhouse, stretching and shifting as the sun's arc rises slightly higher. Dust particles dance in the beams of light that enter through narrow openings, swirling gently like tiny illuminated seeds. Each evening, when the longhouse doors close again, the fire no longer feels like the only guardian standing between the people and the dark. The air outside may still be cold, but it carries softness now, a quiet hint that the world is stirring beneath its icy shell. And as night falls, the stars appear brighter, less blurred by the heavy breath of deep winter. Their light seems sharper, clearer, as though the sky itself is preparing to welcome back the sun. In this moment, you realize something essential. Hope is not loud in the north. It does not burst forth in sudden brightness. It emerges quietly, like water seeping through ice, gradually, softly, steadily. The first thaw does not end winter, but it offers something just as powerful, a reminder that winter will end, that warmth is returning, that the frozen world is capable of melting, softening, waking. And in the longhouse, filled with the gentle sounds of breathing and fire, that knowledge settles into every heart like a slow, rising warmth. Part 14. Preparing for spring, mending the world again. The thaw does not arrive in a single rush of warmth. It comes in slow pulses, a softer day here, a gentler breeze there, the sound of water in a place that had been frozen silence for months. Each small change settles quietly into the village, and with it, the people begin to adjust their rhythm once again. You wake to the familiar glow of the hearth, but the air feels different. It still carries the coolness of night, yet it no longer bites at your skin with the same ferocity. The furs around you are warm, but you notice that you don't need to burrow quite as deeply into them. Somewhere nearby, a drip echoes, a faint, steady tapping as melted snow trickles from the roof and falls onto the ground outside. When the longhouse door opens, the light that enters is brighter than it has been in a long time. It spills across the packed earth floor in a pale golden sheet, dust motes swirling lazily within it. Someone pauses there for a moment, eyes narrowed against the unfamiliar brightness, and smiles in a quiet, almost disbelieving way. The village is still wrapped in snow, but everywhere you look, you see signs of change. The snowbanks are lower now, their edges slumped and uneven. Small rivulets of water carve channels along paths, reflecting the sky in narrow, trembling lines. Patches of dark, damp earth appear near stones and along the base of walls, like fragments of a forgotten world re-emerging. With the first true hints of spring, work shifts. Winter was a time of endurance and maintenance. Now comes the season of preparation, of mending the world, piece by piece, so that it can open itself fully to the coming months of light. Outside the longhouse, men and women gather to inspect the buildings. The turf walls, which have stood bravely through storms and bitter winds, must now be checked for damage. Hands run along seams where turf meets timber, feeling for loosened patches or deep cracks. The texture beneath their fingers is rough and damp, smelling of soil and meltwater. Where they find weakness, they repair it. Fresh turf is cut from exposed ground, thick, heavy pieces that smell rich and earthy, and pressed into gaps like patches on a well-worn cloak. Someone taps them gently into place with a wooden mallet, the sound dull and solid, echoing softly through the clear air. Roofs are cleared of heavy, rotting snow. Wooden ladders scrape against the sides of buildings as people climb, boots thudding lightly on rungs. From above, the village looks like a cluster of shapes emerging from a thinning blanket, lines of smoke rising more cheerfully into a sky that is slowly losing its winter gray. At the edge of the settlement, the boats wait, pulled ashore before winter's grasp took hold. They have stood in place for months, their hulls stiff with cold, their wooden planks dried by icy air. Now, as the thaw reaches the shoreline, attention turns to them. For the Vikings, boats are more than tools. They are lifelines, bridges to other lands, paths across the sea. The first touch of hands on their hulls feels almost ceremonial. Men and older boys gather around a long, sleek vessel resting on wooden supports. Its once smooth surface is mottled with patches of dullness where salt and frost have taken their toll. Fingers trace cracks in the wood, testing for depth. A faint scent of tar clings to the boards, mixed with the dry, aged smell of timber that has weathered too many storms to be easily surprised by another. Someone brings a bucket of tar warmed near the fire. When the lid is lifted, a strong, sharp smell rises, resinous, smoky, sticky. They stir it slowly, the thick liquid clinging to the stick like dark honey. With brushes made from bound fibers, they begin to spread a fresh coat along the boat's sides. The tar shines at first, deep and black, catching the light in smooth, wet streaks. The sound of brush against wood is soft and steady. As they work, they speak in low voices, discussing future voyages, nearby waters, possible storms that still might come. Their words are practical, but beneath them flows an undercurrent of quiet anticipation. The boat, once dormant, is being returned to life. Elsewhere, tools are laid out in the open air for inspection. Axes, sea axes, chisels, adzes, all are checked for rust, for loose handles, for flaws hidden by winter dimness. Metal glints under the clearer light of early spring. Whetstones are brought out, and the sharpening begins anew, accompanied by the familiar, meditative rasp of stone against steel. Inside the longhouse, the season's shift reveals itself in smaller ways. Furs are hung by the doorway to air out, their dense fibers releasing the accumulated scents of smoke and enclosed life. Wool garments are inspected, mended once more, and folded carefully in anticipation of being set aside for milder days. The air itself feels lighter. Smoke still rises from the hearth, but it mingles more easily now with fresher breezes slipping through cracks that no one rushes to stuff with wool. Herbs, stored through winter, are checked. Dried bundles of leaves and flowers shaken gently to see which still hold their scent. The sharp perfume of thyme, the clean bitterness of yarrow, the subtle sweetness of meadow sweet all linger, reminding people that the green world has not vanished, only slept. Children, who spent so much of winter huddled near the fire, begin to venture outside more boldly. Their boots splash in shallow puddles that form along paths, sending thin fans of muddy water into the air. Their laughter sounds different in this season, still soft, still shaped by the long quiet, but carrying a new, bright note that echoes against the melting snowbanks. They search eagerly for the first signs of green, moss returning along stones, tiny shoots pushing through slush, the faintest wash of color where ice recedes from the ground. When they find them, they call out, voices rising with genuine surprise, as though they had discovered a treasure rather than a single blade of grass. Elders watch from benches near the longhouse wall, cloaks wrapped around their shoulders. The light touches their faces gently, revealing lines softened by its warmth. They nod slowly as they see the children point and shout over little patches of growth. They have seen this rebirth many times, yet each spring still feels like a quiet miracle. At the animal pens, work grows more urgent. The sheep's winter coats are thick, heavy with matted wool that has kept them safe through the coldest nights. Soon, shearing will begin, a careful, patient process that transforms animals and humans alike. The wool will be cleaned, carded, spun into thread. In time, it will return to the longhouse in the form of new garments and blankets. But not yet, for now, Hands simply stroke the animals' thick coats, checking for thinness, for signs of illness, for injuries hidden beneath heavy wool. The sheep's warm breath puffs into the air as they stand patiently, eyes slow and dark. The thaw reveals, too, what winter tried to hide. In some corners, rot appears, in wooden posts that stayed too damp, in tools left too near the ground. These are studied, measured, judged. Some can be repaired, others must be replaced. There is no sadness in this, only acceptance. The land and its people have always understood this cycle. What endures, what falls away, what must be rebuilt with each passing year. As days stretch a little longer, the line between day and night becomes clearer. Shadows return. The glow of evening takes on a warmer hue, tinting the snow with faint gold and rose instead of flat, endless gray. When the longhouse door opens at dusk, you can feel a different quality in the air, still cool, but touched by a softness that promises change. At night, as you lie near the hearth, the crackle of the fire sounds less like a desperate defense and more like a steady companion. The longhouse feels less like a fortress and more like a home again, one among many in a world that is reawakening. You listen to the water dripping in the distance, the creak of thawing wood, the contented sigh of someone easing into sleep after a long day of work in the melting light. These sounds form a new winter, end lullaby, a reminder that survival is not just about enduring hardship, but about mending what hardship has worn thin. Tomorrow, there will be more work, more boats to tar, more walls to repair, more tools to sharpen, more animals to tend, more patches of earth to free from their icy shell. But for now, as firelight flickers gently on the beams above, you feel the world tilting slowly away from cold and toward warmth, not in a rush, but in a patient, reliable curve. The Vikings have reached the turning point, and they meet it not with celebration that shouts, but with steady hands and quiet, careful mending. Winter has not quite released them yet, but they are already preparing for the world that awaits on the other side. Part 15. When the light finally returned. The thaw continues its slow, patient work until one morning, when you rise from your place near the hearth, the air inside the longhouse feels undeniably different. You can sense it before you see it, a softness, a lifting, a delicate warmth stitched barely into the coolness. The furs feel lighter around your shoulders. The fire crackles with less desperation. Outside, a faint brightness slips beneath the door. When the latch is lifted and the door pushed open, the world meets you with a pale but unmistakable radiance. The sky has turned a gentle blue, the first true blue since the long dark season began. Sunlight, thin yet determined, stretches itself across the snow-damp ground. It glints off the melting banks, catching in droplets that cling to the edges of branches like tiny pieces of glass. The light is not warm, not yet, but it is steady, and that steadiness is enough. The village stirs with renewed purpose. People step outside not in hurried bursts, but in long, deep breaths. They stand still for a moment, letting their eyes adjust to the brightness. Children squint, shielding their faces, then laugh with a kind of unrestrained joy, the sound rising into the open air with more confidence than before. The snow retreats day by day, revealing dark soil, old footprints frozen in time, and forgotten objects buried under winter's blanket. A wooden spoon, a rope, a small carved toy. The earth smells raw, rich, and sharp as it awakens, the scent rising in cool waves whenever sunlight warms a patch long enough to loosen the frozen crust. As the ground frees itself, a new rhythm fills the village. Men lift boats from their winter supports, carrying them down toward the shoreline on sturdy shoulders. The sea, once bound by ice, begins to move again. Small waves lap against the land, hesitant at first, then with increasing confidence. The sound feels like a familiar voice, returning after months of silence. Tar is heated once more, its thick scent drifting over the village as hulls are coated for the season ahead. The shine of wet tar mirrors the sky, black reflecting blue. The boats themselves seem eager, their curves catching the light as though stretching after a long sleep. Women gather near the clearing to shake out winter garments one last time. Cloaks hang over branches or wooden frames, shedding the final traces of cold. Wool rustles, releasing faint puffs of frost and smoke. The colors, deep reds, earthy browns, faded greens, look richer in the sunlight, no longer swallowed by endless gray. Children wade into shallow puddles forming along the paths, the water icy around their ankles but too enticing to resist. They build channels with sticks, guiding small streams into intricate shapes and patterns. Their laughter blends with the trickle of running water, two sounds that seem designed to greet the coming spring. Near the edge of the longhouse, the elders gather, leaning their backs against sun-warmed walls. They close their eyes, letting the light touch their faces. These are the moments they have lived through dozens of times, yet each return of the sun feels new. You can see the quiet reverence in their expressions, the deep understanding that light is not guaranteed, but earned, season after season. One elder speaks softly to a nearby child. "Look," she says, pointing toward the hill. "The land remembers how to wake," and indeed, along the slope, small green shoots push through patches of melting snow, their tips trembling in the shifting air. They are fragile, barely formed, yet determined enough to pierce the ground that held them for so long. Inside the longhouse, the fire burns in a different mood now, not as a fierce defender against the cold, but as a steady companion. Its smoke rises in a thinner stream. The walls no longer creak under the strain of frozen wind. The air smells less of heavy winter and more of moist earth, wet wool drying, and faint breezes flowing through small openings in the structure. The animals sense the shift as well. Sheep bleat more eagerly, tugging at whatever patches of grass emerge. The cows' breaths are no longer clouds of frost, but gentle plumes that fade into the warming air. Even the dogs, tired of curling close to the fire, roam farther now, sniffing the boundaries of the village with renewed interest. Inside the longhouse, preparations for spring intensify. Tools that were sharpened and repaired during the dark months are now ready for use. Wooden boxes are opened, revealing seeds saved from the previous harvest. Small, dry, weightless things that hold the promise of entire fields. The farmers handle them with care, running calloused fingers through the tiny grains as though greeting old friends. Fields, once buried under snow, begin to soften. The soil beneath your boots feels slightly elastic, no longer frozen solid. When a plow is pressed into the ground for the first time, the earth gives way with a deep, satisfying sigh, rich and dark against the lingering patches of white. The smell rises immediately, earthy, hopeful, textured with life. Along the shoreline, fishermen inspect their nets, stretching them in the light to search for damage. Threads glint in the sun as they are patched, knotted, tightened. The scent of salt returns to the wind as the sea opens wider each day, its dark surface rippling with the promise of fish and future journeys. Slowly, the village breathes again. Evenings are different now. Instead of the heavy, endless dark pressing down on the land, the sky holds a soft glow for longer. The horizon lingers in hues of violet and pale rose, then deepens slowly into blue. Inside the longhouse, the fire crackles more gently, its glow mingling with the faint light from the small windows. People sit with their backs straight, voices lighter, breaths longer. Stories are still told, but they shift. No longer the myths that ward off the deep cold, but tales of past summers, of journeys across the sea, of hunts in green forests. Memories drift through the room like soft smoke, carrying the feel of sunlight, open water, and birdsong. And as the night fully arrives, the cold returns. But it is gentler now, lacking the sharpness that once cut so deeply. Blankets are still pulled close, but not out of fear, simply out of habit. The longhouse breathes with its people, the air warm enough to lull even the most restless minds into sleep. Before you drift off, you reflect on all you've witnessed: the gathering of food, the layering of wool, the sharpening of tools, the singing of stories, the careful tending of children and elders, and the long, enduring patience that carried the Vikings through the coldest season. Winter taught them something profound: that strength is steady, not sudden; that warmth is made, not found; that survival is a quiet collaboration between people, land, and time. And now, as the first true light sweeps across the world again, that lesson settles into your mind with a peaceful weight. Spring will come fully soon, with birds, with color, with new labor and new life. But for this moment, the people simply rest in the brief stillness between seasons, grateful for the light that has finally returned. As the last embers of winter fade into memory, you can almost feel the air warming around you, just as the Vikings once did. Their endurance, their patience, and their quiet rituals carried them through the harshest months, and perhaps remind us that even the longest nights eventually break into dawn. If you enjoyed drifting through this quiet piece of the past, maybe leave a like, or simply let the story lull you gently towards sleep. And if you'd like more calm journeys like this one, you can subscribe, but only if it feels right. The world remembers you,